There's a particular kind of danger that most men never see coming. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require malice or intention. It simply happens when a man stops thinking for himself and begins thinking through the crowd. Dietrich Bonhoeffer spent years observing this phenomenon in one of history's darkest periods, and what he concluded should disturb anyone who values their own mind. He said that stupidity is more dangerous than evil. Not stupidity as lack of intelligence, but stupidity as the surrender of independent judgment. The willingness to let others do your thinking. The comfort of belonging that costs you your ability to see clearly. This isn't about intelligence. Smart men fall into this trap constantly. Education doesn't protect you. Success doesn't protect you. Nothing protects you except the deliberate, difficult practice of maintaining your own judgment even when the crowd offers you certainty and belonging in exchange for your compliance. And most men, if they're honest, can identify moments when they've chosen the comfort of agreement over the discomfort of independent thought. The question isn't whether you're vulnerable to this. The question is whether you're willing to recognize it when it's happening. Bonhoeffer watched ordinary men transform into instruments of atrocity, not because they were evil, but because they stopped thinking. They delegated their judgment to the group, to the leader, to the ideology. And once that delegation happened, they became capable of things their individual conscience would have rejected. The mechanism was simple, and it's still operating today. A man surrenders his judgment gradually, in small concessions, until one day he realizes he's defending positions he doesn't actually believe, attacking people for reasons he hasn't examined, and feeling righteous about both. This is the stupidity Bonhoeffer identified. Not intellectual deficit, but moral surrender disguised as loyalty. Most men don't recognize this surrender because it doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like strength. It feels like standing for something. It feels like being part of something larger than yourself. These feelings aren't wrong in themselves, but they become dangerous the moment they replace your ability to think independently. When your identity becomes fused with a group, an ideology, a movement, you stop being able to evaluate whether that group is right or wrong. You can only defend it. Any threat to the group becomes a threat to you. Any criticism of the ideology becomes a personal attack. Your thinking becomes constrained by what you're allowed to think, and you don't even notice the constraint because it feels like conviction. This dynamic has deep roots in male psychology. Men are tribal by nature. The instinct to belong to a group, to defend that group, to maintain standing within it. These aren't learned behaviors. They're evolutionary imperatives. For most of human history, exile meant death. Being cast out of the tribe was a sentence. So men developed powerful psychological mechanisms to avoid exile, to maintain belonging, to signal loyalty. These mechanisms served us well when survival required group cohesion. But in the modern world, they've become vulnerabilities that can be exploited by anyone who understands how to activate them. When you feel the urge to defend a position you haven't fully examined, that's the tribal instinct at work. When you feel anger at someone who questions your group's beliefs, that's the instinct protecting your belonging. When you feel compelled to signal your loyalty by attacking the designated enemy, that's the ancient fear of exile expressing itself. These responses aren't conscious choices. They're automatic, emotional, powerful, and they bypass the part of your brain that's supposed to evaluate truth independently. The modern world has become extraordinarily sophisticated at triggering these mechanisms. Social media platforms are designed to create tribes and then pit them against each other because conflict drives engagement, and engagement drives profit. Every platform optimizes for outrage because outrage is the emotion that most reliably keeps men scrolling, posting, fighting. You're shown content that confirms what you already believe and content that enrages you about what the other side believes. The algorithm never shows you nuance, never shows you complexity, never gives you space to think. It gives you an enemy and a tribe and tells you to fight. And most men comply without realizing they're being manipulated. The mechanisms of modern stupidity are everywhere once you learn to see them. Corporate environments demand ideological conformity, disguised as values alignment. You're expected to adopt the approved language, or signal the correct beliefs, demonstrate your loyalty to the organizational narrative. Dissent isn't forbidden explicitly. That would be too obvious. Instead, dissent is made uncomfortable, risky, career-limiting. The message is clear. Thinking for yourself is less valuable than fitting in. Most men make the calculation and choose fitting in. They tell themselves it's pragmatic, strategic, necessary. What they don't tell themselves is that they're surrendering their judgment one small compromise at a time. Online spaces accelerate this process. You join a community that shares your interests or concerns. At first, it feels good to find people who think like you, but gradually the community develops orthodoxies. Certain opinions become acceptable, and others become forbidden. The boundaries aren't written down, but they're enforced through mockery, exclusion, public shaming. You learn what you're allowed to say and what will get you cast out. And because belonging feels good and exile feels terrible, you adjust. You stop saying things that might provoke the group. You start repeating things that earn approval. Eventually, you stop thinking things that don't fit the narrative. Your mind has been shaped by the need to belong, and you might not even realize it happened. This is how intelligent men end up defending absurd positions. They're not stupid in the conventional sense. They can reason, argue, cite sources. But their reasoning is constrained by what they're allowed to conclude. They're working backward from the answer they need to reach, finding evidence that supports it and dismissing evidence that doesn't. This isn't conscious dishonesty. It's motivated reasoning, and it feels completely sincere from the inside. The man defending an indefensible position genuinely believes he's thinking for himself. He's not aware that his conclusion was predetermined by his need to maintain tribal standing. Bonhoeffer observed something crucial about this dynamic. He noted that stupidity, in this sense, isn't an intellectual problem that can be solved with facts or logic. You cannot reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. When a man's identity is fused with a belief system, presenting him with contradictory evidence doesn't change his mind. It activates his defense mechanisms. He'll find ways to dismiss the evidence, attack the source, question the motives. Not because he's intellectually dishonest, but because accepting the evidence would require admitting he's been wrong, which would threaten his standing in the tribe. Which triggers the ancient fear of exile. The emotional stakes are too high for mere facts to matter. This is why shame doesn't work to break stupidity. It strengthens it. When you shame someone for their beliefs, you're not giving them a reason to reconsider. You're giving them proof that the outside world is hostile, which drives them deeper into the group that accepts them. The group becomes a refuge from shame, and loyalty to the group becomes even more important. Every attack from outside strengthens the internal bonds. This is why movements that seem obviously wrong to outsiders can become stronger under criticism. The criticism proves to insiders that they're under attack, which proves they must be doing something right. The way out of this trap isn't through confrontation, it's through questions. Not hostile questions designed to expose stupidity, but genuine questions that create space for independent thought. When you ask a man to explain his position in his own words rather than in slogans, something interesting happens. If he's thinking independently, he can do it. If he's repeating tribal orthodoxy, he struggles. The question creates a moment of recognition, not shame, but awareness. And awareness, given time and space, can lead to thought. But even this only works if the man is still capable of independent thought. Once stupidity has fully taken hold, once judgment has been completely delegated to the group, questions don't create awareness. They create defensiveness. The man has merged with the ideology so thoroughly that any examination of the ideology feels like an examination of himself. He can't separate his identity from his beliefs, which means he can't examine his beliefs without experiencing it as self-attack. At this stage, only direct personal experience, something so undeniable that it breaks through the ideology, can reset the system. And even then, many men choose to deny or reinterpret their experience rather than question their beliefs. This should concern you because it means stupidity, in Bonhoeffer's sense, is a state that's difficult to escape once you're in it and difficult to recognize while you're in it. You can be intelligent, educated, successful, and still be completely captured by group thinking without knowing it. The markers aren't intellectual, they're behavioral. Do you find yourself defending positions you haven't personally examined? Do you feel anger at people who question your group's beliefs? Do you use language you didn't create, slogans you didn't write, arguments you didn't originate? Do you feel compelled to signal your loyalty publicly? These aren't signs of conviction. They're signs that you might be thinking through the group rather than for yourself. The distinction matters because what passes as strength in group settings is often just compliance. When everyone around you believes something, agreeing with them takes no courage. It costs nothing. It requires nothing. True strength is the ability to withhold judgment when everyone around you has already decided. The ability to say you don't know when everyone else is certain. The ability to question when questioning marks you as disloyal. This kind of strength is rare because it's uncomfortable. It puts you outside the group. It makes you suspect. It denies you the emotional satisfaction of righteous certainty. Most men choose the comfort of agreement, and they tell themselves it's strength because everyone around them is making the same choice. There's a particular kind of weakness that disguises itself as moral courage. It's the weakness of attacking designated targets, defending approved positions, expressing outrage about sanctioned issues. This feels like bravery because it involves strong emotion and public declaration. But it's not brave to attack someone everyone agrees is bad. It's not courageous to defend a position that puts you in good standing with your group. It's not strength to feel outrage about something your entire tribe is outraged about. These are performances of conviction that require no actual independence of thought. They're safe. They earn approval. They cost nothing except your ability to think for yourself. Real courage is quieter. It's the willingness to pause when everyone else is certain, to remain calm when everyone else is outraged, to consider the possibility that your group might be wrong when loyalty demands you defend it, to maintain your judgment even when that judgment isolates you. This kind of courage doesn't look impressive because it's mostly internal. It's not performed. It's not public. It's the private decision to think independently even when conformity would be easier and more rewarding. Most men never make this decision consciously. They drift into conformity because the alternatives seem too costly. If you question the group, you risk exile. If you think independently, you lose the comfort of certainty. If you withhold judgment, you feel weak compared to those who are certain. These costs are real, and they're immediate. The benefits of independent thought are abstract and delayed, so the rational short-term choice is always compliance. Only the long-term view reveals that compliance costs you something irreplaceable, your mind. When you surrender your judgment to a group, you become a tool. You're no longer acting according to your own evaluation of truth and morality. You're acting according to the group's needs, and the group's needs might be noble or they might be destructive. But either way, you're not the one deciding. You've outsourced the most fundamental human capacity, the ability to determine right from wrong for yourself. This is what Bonhoeffer meant by stupidity being more dangerous than evil. When an evil man knows what he's doing and might be reasoned with or resisted. A stupid man, in this sense, doesn't know. He's genuinely convinced he's right because the group says so. He'll commit atrocities with a clear conscience because his conscience has been delegated to the collective. History is full of examples of this dynamic, but you don't need to look at history. You can see it operating right now in every domain. Corporate environments where men repeat obvious lies because questioning them would mark you as not aligned with the values. Online spaces where men attack strangers for holding the wrong opinions because that's what loyalty to the tribe requires. political movements where men defend the indefensible because admitting error would mean losing identity, or academic environments where men conform to orthodoxy not because they believe it, but because dissent would end their careers. The mechanism is always the same: surrender judgment in exchange for belonging, then defend the surrender as conviction. The psychology of this is worth understanding because it explains why intelligence provides no protection. Smart men can rationalize anything. They can construct elaborate justifications for positions they adopted for purely social reasons. They can find evidence for what they need to believe and dismiss evidence for what they can't afford to believe. Their intelligence makes them better at motivated reasoning, not better at independent thought. This is why you'll see highly educated men defending absurd positions with sophisticated arguments. They're not stupid in the conventional sense. They're stupid in Bonhoeffer's sense. They've surrendered judgment and are using their intelligence to serve the group rather than truth. The way this manifests in men specifically is worth noting. Men are particularly vulnerable to this dynamic because male identity has historically been tied to strength, agency, and independent judgment. When you surrender these qualities, you feel the loss acutely, even if you don't consciously recognize it. So you compensate. You perform strength through aggression. You perform agency through outrage. You perform judgment through certainty. None of these performances are the real thing, but they fool you as much as they fool others. You believe you're strong because you're aggressive. You believe you're thinking independently because you're certain. Yet you believe you're acting with agency because you're outraged. But these are all just symptoms of the loss you're trying to hide. Real strength is the opposite. It's calm under pressure. It's measured in response. It's comfortable with uncertainty. It's willing to be wrong. It doesn't need to prove itself through performance. This kind of strength is rare because it requires genuine confidence. And genuine confidence comes from actually thinking for yourself over time and finding that you can trust your own judgment. Most men never develop this because they never practice it. They're always thinking through some group, some ideology, some authority. They never learn what it's like to stand alone on a position they've arrived at independently. The cost of this shows up in subtle ways. Men who've surrendered judgment become reactive rather than thoughtful. They respond to events based on how they're supposed to respond rather than how they actually think. They feel what they're supposed to feel. They say what they're supposed to say. Their emotional lives become performances of conformity. And because this happens gradually, they don't notice. They believe their reactions are authentic when they're actually scripted by the group. The anger they feel at designated enemies isn't genuine anger. It's performed outrage that's been algorithmically optimized. The convictions they hold aren't conclusions they've reached. They're positions they've adopted to maintain standing. This explains a lot of the exhaustion men feel in modern life. Maintaining performances is tiring. Pretending your group's beliefs are your own beliefs requires constant mental energy. Suppressing doubts, dismissing contrary evidence, defending the indefensible, all of this is work. Real conviction is effortless because it's genuine. Performed conviction is exhausting because you're constantly managing the gap between what you actually think and what you're supposed to think. Most men carry this exhaustion without understanding its source. They blame modern life, technology, stress. They rarely consider that they're exhausted because they're lying to themselves constantly about what they really believe. There's also the question of what happens to men who maintain independent judgment in environments that demand conformity. The honest answer is that it's difficult. You pay social costs. You lose opportunities. You're marked as unreliable, not a team player, potentially dangerous. These consequences are real, or in their design to be real. The system needs compliance, and it punishes independence. So the decision to think for yourself isn't just an intellectual choice, it's a practical calculation about what you're willing to sacrifice for the ability to maintain your own judgment. Most men aren't willing to make that sacrifice, and that's understandable. The costs are immediate and certain. The benefits are abstract and uncertain. It's rational to comply in any given situation. The problem is that rational short-term compliance leads to long-term capture. Each small surrender makes the next one easier until eventually you don't even notice you're surrendering. You've internalized the group's thinking so thoroughly that it feels like your own. This is the end state of stupidity in Bonhoeffer's sense, complete merger with the collective. Now, total loss of independent judgment and genuine conviction that you're thinking freely. Breaking out of this state requires something that's in short supply in modern life: genuine intellectual honesty. Not the performed kind where you claim to be open-minded while defending predetermined conclusions, but the real kind where you're willing to examine your beliefs even when doing so threatens your identity. This is extraordinarily difficult because it requires tolerating uncertainty, admitting you might be wrong, and potentially losing the social benefits of conformity. Most men can't do it. They'd rather maintain comfortable certainty than face uncomfortable truth. The mechanism that keeps men trapped is fear. Not physical fear, but social fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being excluded, fear of losing status, fear of standing alone. These fears are powerful because they're rooted in deep evolutionary programming. For most of human history, these fears kept you alive. Now they keep you compliant. The man who can overcome these fears, who can tolerate being wrong, being excluded, losing status, standing alone, that man can think independently. Everyone else is thinking through the filter of fear, which means they're not really thinking at all. This is why courage is the prerequisite for independent thought. Not physical courage, but moral courage. The willingness to face social consequences for maintaining your own judgment. The willingness to be unpopular, misunderstood, attacked. The willingness to sit with uncertainty when everyone around you is certain. This courage isn't dramatic. Now, it doesn't involve grand gestures or public declarations. It's mostly the private discipline of not surrendering your mind when surrender would be easier. What makes this particularly challenging in the modern environment is that the mechanisms of conformity are largely invisible. You're not being overtly coerced. You're being nudged, shaped, algorithmically guided toward approved positions. The pressure is constant, but subtle. Every platform you use is optimizing to keep you engaged. And the way they keep you engaged is by triggering emotional responses that bypass rational thought. Outrage, fear, tribal loyalty, moral superiority. These emotions feel meaningful, but they're being manufactured to keep you scrolling, clicking, engaging. The more you engage, the more captured you become. So you believe you're thinking independently the entire time because nobody is forcing you. You're choosing to agree with positions that have been carefully selected to activate your psychological vulnerabilities. The solution isn't to disengage entirely. The solution is to notice when you're being manipulated, to recognize the feeling of manufactured outrage, to catch yourself repeating slogans you didn't create, to pause when you feel the urge to attack someone for holding the wrong opinion. These moments of recognition are the beginning of independent thought. They create space between stimulus and response, and in that space you can choose to think rather than react. But noticing requires practice, and practice requires intention. You have to decide that maintaining your own judgment is worth the effort and the cost. Most men never make this decision explicitly. They drift through life thinking whatever their environment encourages them to think, feeling whatever their tribe tells them to feel, and believing they're autonomous the entire time. The illusion is nearly perfect because everyone around them is in the same state. When everyone is conforming, conformity looks like independence. The men who break out of this pattern usually do so through some kind of crisis, an experience that contradicts the ideology so strongly that denial becomes impossible, a moment of clarity where they see the gap between what they're supposed to believe and what they actually think. a betrayal by the group that forces them to recognize they were a tool rather than a member. These moments are painful because they involve recognizing your own stupidity in Bonhoeffer's sense. You weren't evil, but you surrendered your judgment, and in doing so, you became capable of things your actual values would have rejected. The question you should be asking yourself isn't whether you're smart enough to avoid this trap. You probably are smart enough. The question is whether you're honest enough and courageous enough. Are you willing to examine your beliefs even when those beliefs are central to your identity? Are you willing to stand alone when everyone around you is certain? Are you willing to say you don't know when ignorance would mark you as weak? These aren't questions about intelligence. They're questions about character. Most men, if they're honest, will recognize moments when they chose belonging over truth, times when they agreed with something they didn't actually believe because disagreement would have cost them, times when they attacked someone not because they were genuinely wrong, but because attacking them signaled loyalty, times when they felt righteous about positions they hadn't actually examined. These moments aren't evidence that you're a bad person. They're evidence that you're human, and humans are wired for conformity. But they're also evidence that you're capable of stupidity in the way Bonhoeffer meant it. The real question is what you do with that recognition. Do you defend it, rationalize it, pretend it didn't happen, or do you use it as information about your own vulnerabilities? Do you notice the pattern and start guarding against it? Do you develop the discipline of pausing before defending, questioning before attacking, thinking before agreeing? This discipline isn't natural. It goes against your wiring. But it's the only way to maintain your mind in an environment that's constantly trying to capture it. There's no final victory here. You don't reach a point where you're immune to group thinking. The pressure is constant, and your vulnerabilities are permanent. The best you can do is remain aware. Notice when you're reacting rather than thinking. Catch yourself when you're defending positions you haven't examined. Pause when you feel the tribal instinct activating. These small moments of awareness are the difference between thinking for yourself and thinking through the group. What makes this worth the effort is that your mind is all you have. When you surrender it, you surrender everything that makes you autonomous. You become a tool, an instrument, a means to someone else's end. And the terrifying thing is that you might never know. You'll believe you're thinking independently right up until the moment you realize you've been thinking through the collective the entire time. And by then, you might have done things, defended things, attacked things that your actual independent judgment would have rejected. Bonhoeffer understood this because he watched it happen to an entire nation. Ordinary men, good men, educated men, all gradually surrendering judgment until they became complicit in atrocity. Not because they were evil, but because they were stupid in this specific sense. They stopped thinking for themselves. They let the group do their thinking. And once that happened, there was no limit to what they could justify, defend, or commit. You're not immune to this. Nobody is. The question isn't whether you're vulnerable. Or the question is whether you're willing to recognize your vulnerability and guard against it. Whether you're willing to maintain the difficult discipline of independent thought even when conformity would be easier. Whether you're willing to pay the social costs of thinking for yourself rather than through the collective. The answer to that question determines whether you remain autonomous or become a tool, whether you maintain the capacity for moral judgment or delegate it to the crowd, whether you think or merely react. And the choice is yours, but only if you make it consciously. If you don't choose, the default is capture. The path of least resistance leads directly into stupidity. You have to decide actively and repeatedly that your mind is worth defending. Because once you lose it, once you fully surrender judgment to the group, you might never get it back. And you'll spend the rest of your life believing you're thinking freely while actually thinking whatever you're told to think. That's the real danger. Not that you'll be wrong, but that you'll be incapable of recognizing you're wrong because the capacity for independent evaluation will be gone. So the question isn't about them. the manipulators, the ideologues, the crowd. The question is about you. Right now, in this moment, are you thinking for yourself, or are you thinking through something else? And if you're not sure, that uncertainty should concern you more than any external threat. Because the threat isn't out there, it's in here. Or in the moment you stop examining your own thoughts and start assuming they're yours simply because you're the one thinking them.